Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. Before I get started with round 2 of this Modern Competitive League, I just wanted to mention quickly that I did recently start a Patreon page. So if any of you guys are interested in making a small donation to help support me make these videos, it means a lot to me, and I really appreciate all the support you guys give me in the comments and at the Patreon page. So thanks a lot for all that. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with round 2. I won the die roll again, so and this looks like a sensational opening hand, definitely a keep. And the opponent kept 7, so let's open just with Island and pass the turn now. Island doesn't give away immediately that we're on Merfolk, whereas Wanderwine would. Okay, blue-white control, could potentially be Jeskai. We have an opportunity to immediately take them off that colonnade with Spreading Seas and draw us a card, which would be a decent option, but Smuggler's Copter can do so much work in this matchup, and we can start our clock pretty early. So it seems correct here to play the Wanderwine, reveal one of the Harbingers, and just get a Smuggler's Copter onto the board while we have a chance. Alright, opponent turn 2 plays a Plains, and thinks about casting something, but then decides against it, passes the turn back to me. So I would have liked to draw land there. Instead, we drew a third Harbinger of the Tides. Not really many choices to be made here, actually. If we think that the opponent's holding up counter magic, we could try to bait it with something like a Spreading Seas now. But I would much rather just try to play a creature and get the clock ticking. But in response to casting Harbinger of the Tides, the opponent mana leaks it. I don't have 3 mana to pay for it. So of course that's just going to counter my creature. Opponent plays Glacial Fortress and casts the Serum Visions that they may have wanted to have cast the previous turn, but wisely left up counter magic. We're already seeing in this game the huge value that AEther Vial can provide against control decks. Look at the opponent went bottom top with that Serum Visions. Again, with 2 mana up, we did draw a third land, which is pretty nice to see. Again, we could have tried to bait a counterspell with Spreading Seas, which in retrospect may have been a good decision. But during the match, I was just trying to get aggressive and get a creature on the board. Opponent had a second mana leak, and we do not have 3 mana to pay for that one either. So AEther Vial, so important in these matchups. They can make or break an entire match, whether we draw AEther Vials in our opening hands or not. Also, important to note that Cavern of Souls would pretty much do just as good a job as AEther Vial in this situation. I'm sure the opponent has some number of Path to Exiles in their hand, but at least we would be getting Harbingers on the table. As it stands, they're just countering all of our Merfolk, and that's exactly what they want to be doing in the early turns. So even though the board looks pretty innocuous at this point, the blue-white control player has already taken a pretty large advantage, getting to establish 4 lands without me having any attacking creatures on the board. So this time, I think I'll lead out with Spreading Seas first. See if they have another counterspell. If they did, they chose not to use it. I got to resolve a Spreading Seas on the colonnade, which will hopefully slow down or push back the turn where they can start to turn the corner and attack with their man lands. So now I'll try to go for Harbinger of the Tides. That one resolved. And now I'll try to equip and attack with Smuggler's Copter. Doesn't feel very good doing this into 4 mana. In response to the crew activation, the opponent's gonna return the Smuggler's Copter and draw a card. So continuing to just grind all of my play to a halt. Opponent plays a 5th land, cracks it right now. A little bit surprising. But it looks like they have a play. Here's another Serum Visions. Just open up that chat. Looks like they went bottom top again. And another Serum Visions. Got to open up that chat one more time. And this time they went top top. So things continuing to go poorly for us. All right, opponent actually tapping out to play Gideon of the Trials. Now, having come after such a dominant early game with all of their mana leaks, Gideon is quite a blowout in this spot because he can shut off my Harbinger, prevent any damage next turn from that guy, and just continue ticking up with him. He's going to make it harder and harder to get that guy off the board. All right, for my turn, drew a Mutavault, which is good in the matchup. But Gideon, actually, it's a pretty cool ability. It says, until your next turn, prevent all damage target permanent would deal. So even if Mutavault isn't a creature, Gideon doesn't just target creatures, he targets permanents. So he can prevent damage from Mutavault even when it's not activated. So having drawn a Mutavault and the opponent's tapped out, we have a number of choices, I guess. Now remember that Harbinger's not dealing any damage this turn, so it seems best to me potentially just to run out both Smuggler's Copters. We want to save the Spreading Seas for sure for another Colonnade. The opponent already has plenty of mana, so just cutting him off of one white source with the Spreading Seas is not really that important. We already had a land drop to make this turn, so playing the Spreading Seas this turn, suboptimal. Instead, we'll just play out these Smuggler's Copters. Attacking with Harbinger won't do anything, so we'll just pass to the opponent. Wall of Omens, slowing us down even more. Blue-white, just textbook this game so far. There's that second Celestial Colonnade. They're proving the wisdom of not playing Spreading Seas. So Echoing Truth, you guys know, is a singleton in my deck, so drawing it always presents a number of options. If the opponent continues to tick up Gideon, we could use Echoing Truth just to bounce him off the board. So another thing that Echoing Truth can do in the matchup is later in the game, when I've played some Spreading Seas and the opponent has played some Spreading Seas, he would tend to think that he's protected against Mutavault. But I can Echoing Truth all the Spreading Seas. Mutavault suddenly can become active. I can recast a bunch of Spreading Seas to draw a bunch of cards. So these two cards are actually a nice combo in conjunction with one another. But let's just think about this turn right now. Seems like we do want to play out the Spreading Seas and potentially play out the Lord. We could activate the Smuggler's Copters, try to get some loots going. So there's the Spreading Seas on the Colonnade. We'll draw a card to replace it, which we could potentially loot away with the Smuggler's Copter. But Silvergill, I think, is going to actually potentially be better than the Lord of Atlantis here. It's going to at least draw me another card, get a creature on the table, and give me another card that I can potentially loot away. But Reejerey and Lord of Atlantis are pretty good. And as I mentioned, Echoing Truth can be really versatile in this matchup. So having played Creature with Summoning Sickness, I can tap that one to equip one Smuggler's Copter. And then since the opponent has Wall of Omens up for Harbinger, I might as well activate the other Smuggler's Copter, which we can see Gideon has targeted, so it's not going to deal any damage. But if it gets to attack, it'll at least get me a loot trigger. So the opponent pathed the live Smuggler's Copter. I'm going to, of course, replace that with a tapped basic island. We'll get in with the Copter for no damage, but we'll get to loot. Now, the looting there was a little bit tricky because I liked the 3 cards in my hand. And we typically want to loot in those situations anyway, because it's possible we just like the card that we draw even better. And in this case, that's true. I like Kira better than the Reejerey, for example, and potentially better than Echoing Truth. So this looting decision actually presented an interesting turning point in this particular game. I was getting pretty hung up on Echoing Truth since it was going to be really difficult, in theory, I guess, to get rid of this Gideon since it keeps shutting off my attacks. However... And so to finish that thought, Echoing Truth could bounce a Gideon, force the opponent to dedicate more mana to replaying him, at which point hopefully we could have established a board and deal more easily with him. Echoing Truth is a very reactive spell in this matchup, and we need to be the aggressive deck. And I don't think there's ever a situation in hindsight where we want to throw a creature, unless it's maybe a Cursecatcher and the opponent's at a really high life total. I don't think there's ever really a situation where we want to loot Echoing Truth, or not loot or loot a creature away in favor of keeping Echoing Truth. We need all the creatures that we can draw in this matchup. But as I mentioned, this was a turning point in this game, and I got really hung up on this Echoing Truth, potentially providing value with the Spreading Seas, potentially helping out with Gideon. So I did ship away the Reejerey. And in hindsight, I think 100% that was a mistake. Reejerey is a clock that could help destroy Gideon rather than just bounce him for a turn. So guys, please learn from my mistakes. Gideon starts the opponent's turn off by shutting the Smuggler's Copter down again. They play a land and see if they have any plays. Okay, they do not. They're on 3 cards right now. And, you know, we drew a Reejerey to replace the other one, which is decent, but we could have had 2 Reejereys, a Kira, and a Lord in hand, which would just feel so much better. Now, we want to start pushing damage, right? We have some creatures. The opponent's sitting back on 7 lands. They've got a bunch of scries done with Serum Visions, so their hand is probably pretty good at this point. Fortunately, they don't have access to Colonnades yet. They could start activating them even now. They have enough lands for that. Let's take this opportunity to play out. I thought for a second about playing Kira, but Kira is usually better in the later part of the game when the opponent gets even fewer cards in hand, and it can be much harder for them to get through her shield. To play the Island Walk Lord, I think I continued to make a couple missteps, I think, here. I should have activated the Mutavault as well here, first of all. There's no reason why I didn't. Things just going a little bit sideways in this first game of this match. So going into attacks, my approach was still being colored by the fact that I had this Echoing Truth in hand. I had considered that I would just bounce the Gideon later, so maybe I should just start attacking the opponent's life total. Predicting some kind of removal, going after Gideon seems suboptimal because the opponent, if he removes one of my creatures, I would only be chipping a little bit off of Gideon rather than just totally killing him. Again, activating the Mutavault would have been excellent here because I would just have another body to attack with and potentially deal more damage to Gideon, but I went after the opponent's life total instead. And seeing that may have made the opponent, like, they feel safe behind this Gideon because they can make an emblem at any moment that says as long as you have a Gideon on the board, you can't lose the game. So opponent not really afraid of taking some damage here. Whereas they might have been more proactive in defending Gideon if I attacked him. So that's all I had. Again, not sure why I didn't activate the Mutavault. The opponent starts having all these lands, and I think you guys know what this is. The Sphinx's Revelation for 4. There's nothing I can do about it. Goes up to 17. After his draw step, he'll have 7 cards in hand with a Gideon on 6. Soon to be 7, I'm sure. Supreme Verdict, okay. We were expecting that. Once we get up to 3 creatures on board, makes sense for the opponent to hit us. So that resolves. Gideon's going to go up to 7, shutting down my Smuggler's Copter. Now, opponent just passed the turn there, and it may have been correct just to go for Echoing Truth on the Spreading Seas at that moment, to replay them back onto the Colonnades, draw a bunch of cards, and hopefully claw my way back into the game. But I let the moment pass. Again, I'm not very proud of many of my decisions in this game. So drew a Cursecatcher. I think after that first Supreme Verdict, even though the opponent has 5 cards in hand, it's time to play out the Kira. Might as well also get a Cursecatcher on the board. And I think I might just want to push some damage here. So activate Mutavault. The 2 cards in our hand are okay, and the Smuggler's Copter is not dealing any damage. So the loot trigger, not all that important right here. The opponent could have a Snapcaster to trade with my Mutavault. We're protected from Path to Exiles, so at least we're covered on that front. But again, the opponent not really concerned about his life total, so he's probably feeling super comfortable right now. Okay, Wall of Omens. At least that thing doesn't fly. I can attack with Kira. Spreading Seas on the Mutavault. At least I got 2 damage in with that guy. Another Colonnade, and the Gideon goes up to 8, again shutting down Smuggler's Copter. I drew another land. Definitely not what I wanted here. Sort of desperation mode at this point. We'll play the Reejerey. Crew the Copter. Try to loot away that land. Can also swing with Kira. Again, Gideon's gotten up to this point where we might want to bounce him with Echoing Truth. So if we're going to bounce him, we might as well attack the opponent for 2. I I did draw a Cursecatcher, so I got to loot away that land, which is decent. And we've reached that density where we shouldn't overcommit to the board. The opponent shut down Smuggler's Copter again. Supreme Verdicts again. Made me feel a little bit smart for not putting down that Cursecatcher. Cracks a Flooded Strand. And they could have attacked with one of their colonnades, but instead just being very patient. Again, I was pretty tilted at this point. I should have probably led with the Cursecatcher, but I led with the Lord. I don't think it really would have made a big difference. With all that mana up, there had to be a reason. So the opponent countered it and drew a card. I'll follow up with Cursecatcher and just pass the turn. I've invested so much into keeping this Echoing Truth at this point that the idea of looting it away just was not very appealing to me. Okay, 5 mana. They're going to start turning the corner here. Gideon's a 4/4 indestructible. And it just started dawning on me here that bouncing Gideon is pretty poor because we save 4 damage, but the opponent just plays him out again right away and starts ticking him up. We take 4 from the colonnade. So bouncing the Spreading Seas began to seem like a better option. So we go to the end step. I go for the Echoing Truth, which again I've invested so much into, and looks like the opponent has an answer for it. Just straight up negate, no way to play around it, and I just scooped in sort of total defeat there. So a few missteps. Didn't activate a Mutavault when I could have. Didn't attack the Gideon when I could have. Invested just way too much into this Echoing Truth. I do think that the card has a place as a singleton in this matchup. You just need to play wisely. If you have a Smuggler's Copter on board and you have an opportunity to get a bunch of creatures in hand, don't prioritize Echoing Truth over your creatures. All right, and always attack the Planeswalkers. Don't bank on bouncing them with Echoing Truth because the opponent can just replay them, potentially not getting all that much value. If an opponent, for example, activates a Gideon Jura to make us attack the Gideon Jura, potentially just like being a fog and preventing lethal damage, then sure, Echoing Truth on Gideon means we can now attack the opponent and win the game. That's an excellent use for Echoing Truth. But yeah, I think you guys get it at this point. Just not thinking correctly in this game. So I'm going to go ahead to game 2. Please look away for a moment if you don't want to see the match result. I'm going to click out of this window now. All right, back with game 2 against blue-white control. I'll be on the play again this game, and hopefully we'll get a good opening hand and make some good decisions this time. This looks really solid. As I was mentioning at the beginning of last game, when all of my creatures were getting countered, AEther Vial can be a godsend in this matchup, and I'm thrilled to see it. Relic of Progenitus, also amazing. We can potentially get hit by Stony Silence, which would kind of stink here, but we do have some creatures to attack as well. So the opponent mulligan to 6 in this game. Let's see what they did with their scry. They put it on top. So a scry to 6, mulligan to 6 with a scry on top is still pretty good. We're going to open up the game with Minamo into AEther Vial and pass to the opponent. They'll play a Flooded Strand, pass right back to me. Take our AEther Vial up, and what do you guys do in this spot? We play the Wanderwine Hub. Revealing Silvergill Adept, easy enough. For me, it seems pretty simple just to play Relic. If we play Silvergill Adept, it's possible the opponent has Spell Snare to counter it, which would stink since we would get to do it for free with AEther Vial next turn, putting Silvergill in and drawing a card. No, I think playing Relic and leaving up 1 mana to cycle it in the event that the opponent slams Stony Silence next turn seems like a much better play. So they'll crack their Flooded Strand at the end of turn. I'll get rid of it with the Relic of Progenitus, and they get a tapped Irrigated Farmland, which I have to say is probably the most beautiful blue-white land that exists. I love this artwork. It's excellent. That is the cycling duel. Pretty cool. All right, so continuing. Opponent plays an island, and looks like they're just going to pass the turn. No Stony Silence for me this turn. AEther Vial will get to go up to 2, and we drew another AEther Vial. I'm just going to play that this turn. Again, it allows me to leave up mana to crack Relic of Progenitus if the opponent has Stony Silence next turn. And also, it plays around Mana Leak. If they decided that AEther Vial didn't really matter, they could have countered the Silvergill. Again, they could have had Spell Snare in hand. So I'd much rather wait until the opponent's end step to bring in Silvergill Adept. Plays around some of their sorcery speed stuff. Okay, so for the opponent's turn, they play a Plains, so hitting their land drops. Passing, doesn't look like they have much. But on the second main, they pause, and it looks like they are going to put a Gideon out. So a little bit risky, but he does get to go up to 4. The only thing he has to target here is the AEther Vial. So showing again the wisdom behind not main phasing our creatures. If we had put this guy out, the opponent could have targeted it, and then it wouldn't have been able to do any damage next turn. As it stands, we get to put it in now, draw a card, and attack Gideon next turn. So feeling pretty good about that sequence. We're definitely leaving this AEther Vial on 2, and the other one will go up to 1. And drew another Island Walk Lord. So we definitely had the option of putting out an Island Walk Lord with our mana and one with our AEther Vial and just killing the Gideon right now. That seems pretty terrible, though, because if the opponent plays their 4th land and casts Supreme Verdict, then they 3-for-1 us. Not that great. Our hand is excellent right now, but we just have to tread a little bit lightly, make sure that we make careful decisions. Now, if I just attack the Gideon for 2 with the Silvergill Adept, he'll be able to tick up to 3 next turn, but then he'll be that much easier to deal with. If we end step one of our creatures, like, say, the Harbinger, he'll be able to attack by just putting 1 Island Walk Lord out next turn. So I think I'm just going to take it slow for the time being, preferring not to jam 2 of my Island Walk Lords into a board wipe. So we'll just attack with Silvergill into Gideon. He, on his turn, immediately ticks him back up to turn Silvergill off for the turn. And here we see a Timely Reinforcements. It's one of Blue-White Control's more annoying cards. I think most players have that in the sideboard. I don't think it's a main deck spell. Okay, makes 3 soldiers, gains a bunch of life. Fortunately, I do get to activate Relic and get rid of that Timely Reinforcements. Before that, though, I'll just go ahead and put Harbinger onto the battlefield. Then we'll activate the Relic and get rid of the Timely Reinforcements so that Snapcaster can never get that guy back. Okay, we're going to get both of our AEther Vials onto 2 now, since we've got 3 Island Walk Lords in hand, going up to 4 Island Walk Lords in hand. And at this point, very easy decision just to play out one of those Island Walk Lords with an AEther Vial. We're going to go for the attack on Gideon with Harbinger of the Tides. And if the opponent has a Path to Exile, we obviously have a replacement Lord. So there it is, Path to Exile. I'll get a tapped blue source. And I'm going to immediately get rid of that Path to Exile with Relic of Progenitus, and we'll get another Island Walk Lord onto the table. Now, this does play into a board wipe, of course. We've got 3 creatures on the table now. But we made the opponent use a Path to Exile, so trading 1 for 1 with a creature, actually getting us a land in the process, and we'll still get Gideon off the board, which is super important because that guy just keeps slowing us down. Opponent plays a land, and okay, it looks like Kamikaze attack with the soldiers. I go to block with Silvergill, but then think better of it, and I'll just block with the Master. This is almost certainly not a bluff. The opponent is definitely going to jam a Supreme Verdict in a second. But in the event that it is a bluff, the opponent could path my Lord, and if I blocked with Silvergill, then Silvergill would trade just with the Soldier token, and I'm happier just to take 1 extra point of damage than risk trading a Silvergill with a token. So here, opponent's tapping their mana. There's the predictable Supreme Verdict. And for our turn, we're still going to leave these AEther Vials on 2. And we continue drawing gas. This is a nice creature to draw. Get him on the board. So first activate Relic. The opponent got rid of Gideon. We'd love to get that Supreme Verdict out of the graveyard. Play Harbinger. We still have 1 mana up to crack Relic if we need to. Now the opponent's just passing with 3 cards in hand. At the end step, after the Supreme Verdict has resolved, previous turn, we can now start to push as much pressure as we can. I think we're going to put both of these Island Walk Lords onto the table, potentially presenting 10 points of damage next turn. Okay, we untap. We can now start to tick up one of the AEther Vials. It'll go to 3, and we'll leave the other one on 2, since most of our deck is 2 drops. Fourth land is not that great. We'd love to be able to loot that away, but I think I sideboarded out my Smuggler's Copters. Let's take a second, pause here, and look at the sideboard. Something I need to get into the habit of doing with you guys. So I took out my 4 Spreading Seas, and I took out my 1 Dismember. I took out the 2 Smuggler's Copters. Since the Smuggler's Copters featured pretty prominently in Game 1, I figured I would hedge against Stony Silence by taking them out. So after this match, and after playing a few more blue-white opponents, I've realized I also looked at a bunch of their lists on MTG Top 8, and almost all the blue-white decks play only 2 copies of Stony Silence in the sideboard. So Smuggler's Copter can be so great against blue-white control that I think it's correct to keep it in, even if they do bring in Stony Silence and land it. Especially if we keep our Singleton Echoing Truth in the deck, because we can always bounce the Stony Silence and then get a surprise attack in with the Smuggler's Copter. Let me know your guys' thoughts on that, but I do think it's correct to keep in the Copter, even through the risk of Stony Silence. So 7 cards out. Again, 4 Seas, 1 Dismember, 2 Smuggler's Copters, and I brought in 6 counter spells. At this point, I had 4 Negates, 2 Dispels, and I brought in only 1 Relic. Again, having played more matches against this deck since this particular match, I think it's correct to bring in exactly 2 Relics against them, because most of the decks tend to play 2 or maybe 3 Snapcasters. So they're not trying to get a ton of value out of the graveyard, but Relic is a pretty easy decision to bring in. We can always cycle it in response to the opponent playing Stony Silence, and if the opponent does happen to draw into Snapcasters, it can be a pretty big blowout, so it's worth it to bring in a couple of these things. But for this particular match, I only had the 6 counters and 1 Relic. All right, so that's our sideboard summary. Having drawn this land, looks like the opponent's going to pause me on my draw step and path one of my Island Walk Lords. Of course, we'll get a land to replace him, thinning our deck, letting us draw more gas in subsequent turns. So speaking of Snapcaster, I'm going to go ahead and activate the Relic, trying to get rid of one of their spells. They chose to exile the Path to Exile, leaving the Supreme Verdict. Also, speaking of Snapcaster, I can only attack with the Harbinger safely here, since Snapcaster could ambush Viper and block my Lord of Atlantis, and that would just be terrible. But the opponent takes 3. We've started doing some damage to them, which feels good. They play a Glacial Fortress, going down to 2 cards in hand. And it looks like they're passing the turn, which is great, because now we can tick our AEther Vial up to 4, and hopefully tick that Supreme Verdict out of their graveyard. So optimal AEther Vials here with 4 and 2, and that Negate is just a delicious draw, because we're going to be able to get this Master of Waves in at the opponent's end step, and it's very likely that they'll try to either Path or Cryptic Command, and we can just push a ton of damage with Negate protecting us. So let's go ahead and get rid of that Supreme Verdict. Again, we're going to try to chip in with the Harbinger, see if it gets through. Now, interesting, the opponent tapped his planes for a second there. It seems like a bluff on Path to Exile. I do that kind of stuff sometimes by tapping and untapping. So I kind of know that it's most likely a bluff. I actually wanted to mention something about the turn when I attacked Gideon. I just remembered this now. And the opponent pathed my Lord, and then I put in a second Lord, and Gideon died. It's really interesting to note that if the opponent had just pathed the Harbinger of Tides, Gideon would have lived no matter what, because Harbinger is the only attacking creature. The opponent was really greedy in pathing my Lord with an AEther Vial up on 2, because, I mean, they were trying to eat my Harbinger with their soldier tokens, but if they had just pathed the Harbinger when it was attacking Gideon, they Supreme Verdicted like 2 turns later, I think. So they would have gotten rid of my Lords anyway. So anyhow, just something to think about. So when you're watching the video, try to go back and look at that Gideon situation again. I think the opponent was pretty greedy in that spot. So we attacked for 3, and the opponent is back down below 20 life. We've still got a Relic on board. And during the opponent's end step, they just passed through their turn. We do get to put Master of Waves in. We get 5 tokens, which is a little bit absurd, actually. Every now and then, I'm reminded of how powerful our 4-drop is. Yeah, he's a 2-1 by himself, but with a Lord on the table, he just brought 13 damage. It's a little bit crazy for a 4-drop. So we untap. Aether Vials are definitely just going to stay where they are. And drew another Island Walk Lord, which actually lets me turn all of my guys sideways. Or try to, at least. Alright, so opponent's going for Cryptic Command. We've got Negate and 3 mana up to pay for a Mana Leak, which is being represented here. The only thing that sort of protects the opponent here is something like a Dispel, I guess. Or no, they could have Negate, because we saw a Negate in the previous game, but they're down to 2 cards. So obviously, we're going to try to use our Negate. If you've done the combat math here, you'd have seen that we are only attacking for 18 this turn. And the opponent hasn't had a path in the last couple of turns, so I think it's pretty safe to jam this Master. If the opponent paths, we can always try to potentially cycle the Relic and draw into another piece of counter magic, but we want to go for lethal here if possible. Just shut this down while we have a chance. And we got there, so a much, much better game 2 for us. We drew our Aether Vials early. And the relics seem to do work, even though we're not sure if the opponent had a Snapcaster in hand at all that game. Remember, they do only run 2 or 3, typically. All right, so please look away for a moment. If you don't want to see the match results, I'm going to click out of this window now. And I'm back with the final game of round 2 of this modern competitive league. The opponent's going to be on the play this game, and we drew what looks like a pretty sensational opening hand. So easy keep for us. And the opponent kept as well. We're going to see Island into Serum Visions. I might just leave this chat open for a little while here. We see he went top and bottom, so pretty average. We'll go ahead and play an Island into Aether Vial with the expectation that we'll play our second Aether Vial next turn. Okay, before his land drop from the second turn, which is pretty smart, we're going to see a second Serum Visions. He'll potentially draw into like a Celestial Colonnade, which he might want to get onto the battlefield this turn. So bottom top again, there's a Glacial Fortress, and just a pass back to me. Echoing Truth, remember, as a singleton, I always like seeing it, but knowing that it's a singleton is pretty cool too, because I know I won't draw any more of them, and that I have to assign it its proper value. Use it when I should, and don't overinvest in it like I did in the first game. So here, again, I think we want to play around Spell Snare, so also get Aether Vial ticking up, so we'll get that Aether Vial out there. Alright, so there's the Stony Silence. I feel like I see this every time I play against blue-white. We do, of course, need to keep our Aether Vials in this matchup. It's just too important. But Echoing Truth suddenly gaining a whole lot of relevance. Opponent plays a third land tapped. We're both still at 20 going into my third turn. Now, just because Stony Silence is out doesn't mean you can't keep adding counters to your Aether Vials. I'm going to go up to 2 and 1. And that Dispel is pretty interesting because when we do cast Echoing Truth eventually, we'd love to have Dispel as backup to make sure that we'll be able to get some creatures on board with our Aether Vials. So for the turn, pretty much an obvious choice. We're just going to play the Silvergill. I believe I revealed a Reejerey. No, I revealed the Harbinger. It's 6 half a dozen. Makes virtually no difference. Okay, so I drew a Cavern. And I've commented on this many times in this matchup. You typically want to keep Cavern of Souls in hand until you're ready to cast a creature, because blue-white control, I think, typically plays 2 Ghost Quarters and 4 Spreading Seas, so they have a lot of answers to troublesome lands. But this is my turn 3, and I'd rather not miss my land drop if possible. So I'm going to go ahead and run out Cavern of Souls, naming Merfolk, and just pass the turn to the opponent. Okay, so they have the Spreading Seas right away, but that's actually excellent for us, if we think about it, because we would love to cast Echoing Truth and still have blue mana up for Dispel. As it stood, I only had the 1 island, but now I have 2 blue sources. So we'll have to wait until next turn to do that, but I think that we're probably going to leave mana up for that sequence on the opponent's end step. So we'll tick our Aether Vials up to 3 and 2, and things are starting to look potentially pretty explosive if we can get this Echoing Truth resolved. Let's swing in for 2 points of damage and just see what the opponent has for their turn. Okay, a Snapcaster Mage. They've already cast 2 Serum Visions, so they're going to resolve a third here. Definitely not going to counter that. Okay, so there's the Serum Visions with Flashback, and we can see again what they did with it. They went bottom top, so bottom top every single time. At this point, I was very happy to see the opponent using mana in their main phase, so that they're not leaving up mana for things like Snapcaster Path or Cryptic Commando my turn, because I'm expecting a pretty big attack step on my next turn. So let's make it to the end step, and I'll go for this Echoing Truth now. Opponent had no response. We did have Dispel protecting us against Negate or Mana Leak. So that was awesome. During the end step, we get to put out a Reejerey, and also, I think I'm going to put Harbinger out now. Save the Island Walk Lord for my turn. So these Aether Vials are going to be active on our turn as well. We'll leave that at 3 because we don't have a 4-drop in hand yet. Sometimes it can be a little bit hasty, ticking up to 4 too soon. But we drew a 4-drop, so it would have been correct, I guess. Alright, so we've got Dispel back up. And I think the best thing to do here, after that sort of surprise situation bouncing the Stony Silence, is jam the Lord of Atlantis, activate Mutavault. We'll be attacking for 4, 4, 4, and 3, which I think is 15, taking almost all the opponent's legs out early in the game, and then we can just hopefully just lean and close it out. So I'm going to go ahead and activate Mutavault, and then activate AEther Vial. Bring in the Lord of Atlantis, and let's swing for the fences here. Again, 4, 4, 4, and 3, adding up to 17. A huge chunk of damage. The opponent, I'm sure that I was totally caught off guard here. It's going to try to path my Lord, which would be a little bit of a blowout. Well, be a rather large blowout, actually, because he could then block and trade with Merrow Reejerey, and he'd only be taking 9 then, which is substantially higher than 3. But I wouldn't have made such a risky attack, I don't think, if I didn't have the Dispel in hand, but I did. So, again, surprising the opponent at every turn in this third game. Important to note here that I have Master of Waves, which I can flash in next turn after a board wipe, activate Mutavault, and swing for lethal that way. Okay, so here's another Serum Visions. He's looking for something really specific right now, probably a board wipe. So he went bottom, and then scooped. Alright, so even though I made a few missteps in the first game, we won game 1 fairly easily, I think it's safe to say. And then this was a really interesting game 3. I've had some cool situations with Echoing Truth against blue-white, mostly involving bouncing like 5 Spreading Seas and drawing a bunch of cards. But bouncing that Stony Silence with Dispel backup felt super good. So please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about the match. Here's another link to the Patreon, which I mentioned earlier. If you guys feel like donating $1 or $2, I would be very grateful for that. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and tune in for the next video where I'll be going into the 3rd round of this modern competitive league. Thanks, guys. I'll see you there. Bye.